Gather round, my children, and listen to these old tales. A trio of encounters with the Duppies, the mischievous spirits of our island. I have heard these stories passed down from elders and whispered on stormy nights. Let me share with you 3 distinct encounters, each a thread in the rich tapestry of Jamaican folklore.
These are the legends whispered in the night, stories of mystery, fear, and wonder. Welcome to Island Myths and Legends. The islands remember, do you?
I remember it as if it were etched into the very bark of my soul. A night when the moon cast a ghostly silver over the hills of St. Anne, and the ancient silk cotton tree became the stage for an encounter that would haunt generations. Gather round as I recount the chilling tale of old Miss Marcia, whose fateful vigil beneath that sprawling tree unspooled a nightmare from the depths of our folklore. Miss Marcia was a woman of quiet dignity and unwavering faith. In her youth, she had witnessed the cycles of life and death in a small village where legends were as real as the soil beneath one's feet. The elders would often speak in hushed tones of the Duppies, restless spirits condemned to roam the living world. Yet nothing in those whispered warnings prepared her for the terror that awaited one fateful night. It began on a sultry summer evening when the heat of the day surrendered to the cool embrace of dusk. The sky was a tapestry of deep indigo and fading gold, and a soft breeze carried the fresh scent of the flowers of the silk cotton tree. Miss Marcia, unable to sleep due to a bout of fever, sought solace under the ancient silk cotton tree that stood at the heart of her small homestead. Its gnarled roots and broad, twisting branches had sheltered her family for generations. That night, however, the tree's familiar comfort became an ominous portal to the unknown. As she sat cross-legged on a faded quilt, clutching her prayer book with trembling hands, the world around her began to change. The whispering wind grew insistent, as if urging her to listen. The leaves rustled in a language only the night could understand, and the shadows deepened into eerie shapes. With every passing minute, the air thickened with a sense of impending dread. Then, from the silence, came a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle that seemed to echo from beneath the earth itself. Miss Marcia's heart pounded like a drum in her ears as she strained to catch the sound's source. The rustling of leaves took on a sinister cadence, and a chill crept up her spine. In that instant, she felt not just the presence of nature, but the weight of something far older and far more malevolent. Her eyes fixed on a dark patch under the tree's expansive canopy. There, moving with a fluid, spectral grace, was a figure that defied explanation. It was as if the shadows had taken form, a silhouette draped in tattered remnants of what once might have been human attire. The figure's movements were languid, almost ritualistic, as if it were dancing to the silent rhythm of ancient sorrow. Miss Marcia's lips parted in silent prayer, her voice a trembling whisper meant for ears beyond mortal realms. In that moment, time itself seemed to suspend. The night, which had offered a reprieve from the heat of day, now crackled with an electric tension. Miss Marcia felt a profound isolation, as though the very fabric of reality had frayed and revealed the dark tapestry behind. Her prayer book trembled in her grasp as she began reciting psalms, each word a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. The Duppy drew closer, its presence heavy and undeniable. Its eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to glimmer with an otherworldly luminescence, reflecting centuries of unspoken sorrow. With each step it took, the ground itself seemed to moan in despair. Miss Marcia's mind raced through the old stories, the warnings handed down through generations. Never linger after midnight, never allow your guard to drop in the company of restless souls. But it was too late for caution. The entity reached out with an ethereal hand, as if trying to pull her into its realm of eternal twilight. For one agonizing moment, Miss Marcia was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and the paralyzing grip of ancient terror. She felt as though the boundaries between the living and the dead were dissolving around her, and the whispering voices of long-departed souls swirled in the humid air. In a burst of desperate courage, she raised her prayer book higher, her voice rising in defiant prayer. The words seemed to form a protective barrier around her, a shield woven from faith and the collective strength of those who had come before. The Duppy halted, its form wavering as if uncertain of how to breach this newfound defense. For a time that stretched into an eternity, the only sounds were the pounding of her heart and the rustle of the leaves of the silk cotton tree in the night wind. Then, as if chastened or perhaps forced back by forces unseen, the figure began to retreat. Its departure was not a gentle fading but a violent recoil, as if the very act of leaving was a struggle against the bonds that held it to this mortal plane. Miss Marsh's eyes, wide with terror and relief, followed every contorted movement until the last wisp of its form dissolved into the darkened soil. After what felt like an age, silence returned. The silk cotton tree, once a symbol of familial comfort, now loomed as a dark sentinel against the night. Miss Marcia remained there, shivering beneath its sprawling branches, her mind racing with visions of spectral anguish and unspeakable horrors. In the aftermath of that encounter, she knew that she had witnessed not just a spirit, but the manifestation of a curse that had lingered over her land for centuries. In the days that followed, the community whispered of the incident with a mixture of awe and dread. Some said that the silk cotton tree was cursed, a relic of a time when the barrier between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Others believed that Miss Marsh's encounter had awoken something that had lain dormant beneath the earth, a force of retribution against those who dared disturb the natural order. Night after night, the tree became a locus of both legend and terror. Neighbors reported hearing mournful weeping near its trunk and witnessed strange, luminescent lights flickering among the leaves. The once beloved tree now stood as a grim reminder of that fateful night, a silent, ominous witness to the eternal struggle between the realms of light and darkness. For Miss Marcia herself, the encounter was a turning point. Once a pillar of the community, she gradually withdrew into herself, her once warm smile replaced by a haunted gaze. Locals, as if waiting for the return of the Duppy, she would whisper prayers that seemed to merge with the rustling of the leaves, and those who passed by swore they could hear her pleas carried on the wind. Some nights, when the sky was particularly clear, the old women would gather in hushed circles, recounting their own encounters with the supernatural. They spoke of shadows that moved with a mind of their own, of inexplicable sounds that defied logic, and of the persistent belief that the spirits of the dead were never truly laid to rest. It was said that the silk cotton tree was a nexus, a thin spot where the boundaries between the two worlds were perilously weak, and where the Duppies could slip through in search of solace or vengeance. The legend of the silk cotton tree did not fade with the passing years. Instead, it grew, fed by the fear and fascination of each new generation. Young lovers dared each other to approach its gnarled trunk. Thrill-seekers recorded their visits only to share eerie, inexplicable footage, and skeptics found themselves unnerved by the inexplicable chill that seemed to emanate from the very roots of the tree. One particularly stormy night, nearly a decade after Miss Marsh's initial encounter, a group of college students on a break from their studies decided to spend a night near the infamous tree. The group, a mix of believers and doubters, sought to capture the supernatural on film, a modern attempt to document the ancient terror. As the winds howled and rain lashed against the ground, they set up their equipment in the clearing beneath the silk cotton tree, their laughter and bravado a feeble shield against the oppressive darkness. At first, the night seemed to be nothing more than a series of pranks and tall tales. But as the clock ticked past midnight, an oppressive silence fell over the group. The air grew inexplicably cold, and the once familiar sound of the rain transformed into a mournful dirge. One of the students, a young woman named Alana, claimed to hear a soft humming, a lullaby from a time long forgotten. Drawn to the sound, she wandered away from the circle, her steps hesitant and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Moments later, the remaining students heard a blood-curdling scream that shattered the silence. Panic erupted as they rushed toward the source, only to find Alana lying motionless near the base of the silk cotton tree. Her eyes stared blankly upward, and her body bore inexplicable marks, etchings of sorrow that glowed faintly in the dim light. In that moment, the legends of old became terrifyingly real. The students scattered in terror, leaving behind their equipment and their skepticism. Word of that fateful night spread quickly, rekindling the ancient fear that the Duppies were more than mere stories. In hushed conversations and anxious glances, the villagers agreed on one grim truth. The silk cotton tree was not just a relic of the past, but a living reminder of the thin veil between worlds, a doorway that, once opened, could never be fully closed. Over time, the tree became a forbidden place. Those brave enough to speak of it would lower their voices, and even the most modern of minds could not shake the chill that ran down their spine at its mention. The tale of Miss Marsh's encounter and Alana's tragic fate melded into a single, unyielding narrative, a testament to the enduring power of folklore and the relentless pull of darkness. On certain nights, when the moon is full and the wind carries a strange, mournful tune, the villagers claim to see a spectral figure moving slowly beneath the silk cotton tree. It is said that the figure is that of Miss Marcia herself, forever bound to the tree by her fateful encounter, her eyes reflecting the sorrow and terror of an age-old curse. And sometimes, if one listens closely, a soft, sorrowful chant can be heard, a lament for the lost souls, a dirge for the forgotten, echoing through the night like a warning. I have spent many restless nights pondering these events, questioning whether the veil between the living and the dead is truly as impenetrable as we believe. The silk cotton tree stands as a monument to that uncertainty, a silent keeper of secrets that have been passed down through countless generations. In its twisted branches and darkened roots lie not only the echoes of lost souls, but also the legacy of fear, a reminder that some mysteries are better left undisturbed. For those who dare approach the tree now, there is a palpable sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The land itself seems to breathe in unison with the ancient heartbeat of the island, each gust of wind a whisper from the other side. And though modern science may dismiss such tales as mere superstition, the terror that lingers in the eyes of those who have witnessed its power is unmistakable. It is a horror that transcends time, a living nightmare etched into the history of our people. So heed this warning, dear listener. Should you ever find yourself beneath the shadow of that ancient silk cotton tree on a night when the stars hide behind a cloak of clouds, remember the story of Miss Marcia. Listen closely to the rustle of the leaves and the faint, mournful strains of a long-forgotten hymn. For in that quiet, haunted moment, you may find yourself standing at the threshold of a realm where the dead do not rest, and where the boundaries of reality dissolve into the inky blackness of fear. And if you ever hear that soft, desperate prayer echoing through the night, know that the Duppies are near, eternally restless, eternally longing for a connection with the living. Their presence is a reminder that even in our modern world, the ancient and the arcane continue to weave their spell over our hearts and minds. The silk cotton tree, with its silent vigil, remains a testament to the power of stories and the inescapable grip of the supernatural, a horror that will haunt our dreams and our waking hours for as long as the night endures. Thus ends the tale of the haunted silk cotton tree, a story passed down from one generation to the next, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places hide the darkest secrets. In the whispering wind and the swaying branches, the lament of lost souls continues to echo, ensuring that the legacy of that fateful night and the terror it unleashed will never be forgotten. May this account serve as both a warning and a tribute to the enduring mysteries of our land, a story of fear, of faith, and of the eternal dance between life and the darkness that lies just beyond.
Keisha had always believed in the power of stories, stories that whispered of the island's dark past and the restless spirits that walked among the living. As the host of a small community radio show, she had spent years giving voice to forgotten legends. Yet nothing had prepared her for the night when the call came. It was a stormy evening, the kind where the wind howled with the force of ancient grief, and the rain battered the studio's windows like desperate hands. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound almost drowned by the fury of the tempest outside. Keisha was alone in the control room, her warm studio lights a fragile barrier against the night's encroaching gloom. The show was nearing its midnight slot, a time when listeners expected to hear eerie tales of a supernatural, folklore passed down from generation to generation. Tonight, however, would be different. As she sat at the microphone, preparing to introduce the next segment of her show, the phone on her desk rang. Its shrill tone cut through the static that had settled in the background. With a furrowed brow, Keisha picked up the receiver. "Radio Midnight," she said softly, not quite expecting a response. But on the other end came a voice that was barely more than a whisper, a soft, trembling tone layered with the crackle of interference. "Please, you have to help me," the voice pleaded. It was the sound of a person steeped in despair, as if each word was exhaled in agony. Keisha's pulse quickened. In all her years behind the microphone, she'd never received a call quite like this. It wasn't a prank. There was an undeniable, almost spectral quality to the sound. The caller continued, "There's something out there near the old coastal cottage. I saw it. I heard it, and now it's coming." Keisha leaned forward, heart pounding. The coastal cottage was a local legend in its own right, a dilapidated structure perched on jagged rocks by the sea, abandoned after a series of inexplicable tragedies that had left the community shrouded in silence and fear. For years, rumors had circulated of a Duppy, an unsettled spirit drifting between the worlds, haunting its crumbling halls and the storm-lashed beach beyond. But no one had dared to confirm the stories until now. The caller's voice wavered between desperation and terror, punctuating his words with gasps and a low, mournful sound. "It calls, its voice, like the sound of the wind mourning. I saw its eyes, glowing, empty, filled with sorrow. And then I heard footsteps, though no one was there. Please, you must warn them." Before Keisha could ask for more details, the line crackled violently, and the caller's voice was swallowed by a deafening burst of static. The phone went dead. A cold shiver crept along her spine as she stared at the receiver in disbelief. It wasn't the first time the station had received a call steeped in paranormal mystery, but the raw fear in that voice was unlike anything she'd heard before. For a long moment, Keisha hesitated, her mind racing. The responsibility of a radio host was to report and investigate, but what if this was more than a mere tale? The atmosphere in the studio was charged with an electric tension. Rain pounded against the windows, as if urging her to act. Finally, driven by a mix of professional duty and personal curiosity, Keisha announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just received an unusual call. I don't know if it's real or if it's one of those old ghost stories coming to life, but I promise you we're going to find out." Over the next several minutes, the storm intensified, and Keisha's thoughts drifted back to the legends of the coastal cottage. Locals said that it had once belonged to a prosperous family, until a series of untimely deaths and unexplained occurrences forced them to abandon the property. Ever since, strange lights had been seen in its broken windows, and mournful cries were said to echo through the night. Many believed that a Duppy, a spirit unable to find peace, lingered there, forever bound to a past filled with sorrow and regret. Determined to uncover the truth, Keisha decided to take a daring step. With her recording equipment packed into a small backpack and her trusty digital recorder clutched in hand, she drove through the storm to the coastal outskirts. The road was slick with rain, and the howling wind made it nearly impossible to keep her eyes on the winding path. Every flash of lightning revealed jagged silhouettes of ancient trees and treacherous cliffs that disappeared into the ink-black sea. As she neared the location, the coastal cottage emerged from the darkness, a hulking, time-worn relic battered by the relentless ocean. Its paint was peeling, and the structure sagged under the weight of memories too heavy to bear. Keisha parked her car a safe distance away and stepped out into the tempest. The wind clawed at her clothes, and rain whipped her face as she approached the property, guided only by the dim beam of a flashlight. The air grew colder as she drew closer, the sound of the crashing waves mingling with an almost imperceptible, eerie hum, a sound that resembled distant weeping. Keisha's heart pounded as she made her way up a cracked, stone path leading to the front door of the cottage. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind as if inviting her into a world that was better left undisturbed. Inside, the building was a shadow of its former self. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting pale, ghostly patterns on the decaying floorboards. Every step echoed in the emptiness, each sound magnified by the oppressive silence that had settled over the place. As Keisha moved deeper into the foyer, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, an unseen presence lurking in every dark corner. Suddenly, her recorder, which had been silent until now, began to capture a low, rhythmic sound. It was as if someone, or something, was softly tapping a steady beat in the distance. Keisha paused, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, blending with the howl of the storm, until it became unmistakable, a soft, almost melodic tapping echoing through the halls of the abandoned cottage. With each measured step, she followed the sound deeper into the building. The corridor was narrow and lined with faded wallpaper, its colors muted by decades of neglect. In the dim light of her flashlight, shadows danced along the walls, contorting into figures that seemed to reach out for her. The tapping grew erratic, its rhythm quickening as if it were in distress. At last, Keisha reached a door at the end of the hall, a heavy, oak door with intricate carvings that hinted at a once grand past. The tapping was loudest now, resonating from behind the closed door. With trembling hands, she pushed it open, revealing a small parlor that had once been a lively room filled with laughter and music. Now, it was a frozen relic, a room where time had stood still. In the center of the parlor, an old phonograph sat on a dusty table, its horn pointing toward a wall lined with portraits of somber-faced ancestors. The tapping, it turned out, was not coming from any ghostly apparition, but from the phonograph's needle, which was moving on its own across a scratched record. The eerie sound filled the room, each click and scratch echoing the sorrow of a long-lost era. Just as Keisha's initial relief began to settle, a sudden, chilling whisper cut through the static of the rain. "I'm still here. Please, help me." The voice was soft, desperate, and unmistakably human, though laden with an otherworldly melancholy. Keisha's blood ran cold. The voice seemed to emanate from the very walls of the parlor, mingling with the mournful tapping of the phonograph. Her instincts screamed at her to run, yet her journalistic determination pushed her to confront the source of the voice. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice echoing in the haunted room. The reply was almost immediate, a sorrowful murmur that seemed to emanate from the darkness behind the portraits. "I was left behind, abandoned, cursed." In that moment, the temperature dropped further, and the room grew oppressively cold. Keisha's breath became visible in the dim light as she felt a presence circling around her. The portrait's eyes, frozen in their painted stares, seemed to follow her every move. The tapping on the phonograph slowed, then stopped, leaving behind a void of silence that was more terrifying than any sound. Summoning every ounce of courage, Keisha stepped toward one of the portraits, a woman in a faded dress, her eyes sad and knowing. Beneath the portrait was a small brass plaque, nearly corroded with age. The inscription read, "Eliza Marrow, beloved daughter, 1892. A chill ran through Keisha. Eliza's story was a well-known tragedy among the villagers, a tale of forbidden love, despair, and a mysterious death that had left her spirit bound to the estate. As if in response to her silent inquiry, a gust of wind burst through a shattered window, scattering fragments of glass like icy raindrops. In that moment, Keisha felt a deep sorrow emanating from the portrait, a longing for redemption, for release from a past marred by heartbreak and betrayal. The whisper returned, clearer this time. "Release me, set me free." Unable to resist, Keisha reached out a trembling hand to touch the cool frame of the portrait. The instant her fingers made contact, a shock of energy surged through her. The room spun, and for a heartbeat, she saw visions of a bygone era, flashes of candlelit balls, passionate embraces, and a sudden, brutal tragedy. The visions were overwhelming, a torrent of emotion and memory that left her reeling. Then, as quickly as they had come, the images faded, replaced by the stark, cold reality of the haunted parlor. Shaken yet determined, Keisha resolved that she would document this experience and share the truth behind Eliza's tragic story. She set up her recorder on a nearby table, capturing every whisper and rustle. The ghostly presence seemed to recede slightly, as though momentarily soothed by her willingness to listen and honor its pain. In the silence that followed, only the soft drip of rain and the distant roar of the ocean remained. As the storm outside began to subside, Keisha gathered her notes and prepared to leave the cottage. But as she reached the doorway, the air shifted once more, a lingering presence brushing past her, leaving a final, haunting murmur in the air. "Thank you." The words were both a farewell and a plea, echoing through the empty hall as if from another time. Outside, the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light on the wreckage of a storm. Keisha drove back to the station, her mind racing with questions and an overwhelming sense of duty. That night had been more than an investigation. It had been an encounter with the living remnants of the past, a dialogue with a spirit imprisoned by tragedy. In the days that followed, she carefully compiled her recordings, notes, and recollections, determined to share Eliza Marrow's story with the world. On the air that next evening, Keisha's voice was steady yet imbued with a profound sadness. "Tonight," she began, "I bring you a story not just of fear and the supernatural, but of love lost and souls yearning for release. In the ruins of an old coastal cottage, I encountered a spirit whose sorrow was as deep as the ocean that crashes upon these shores. Her name was Eliza Marrow, and her ghost has haunted this place for over a century, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to remember her and set her free." Listeners across the island tuned in, drawn by the raw emotion and mystery that colored her words. Keisha's account was met with a mixture of disbelief and empathy, and soon, calls flooded the station from those who claimed to have felt a similar presence in the dead of night. Some said they heard the soft tapping of a record in abandoned rooms. Others swore that on moonlit nights, a figure in a faded dress wandered near the ruins, her eyes filled with longing. In the months that followed, Keisha continued her work, chronicling more accounts of the supernatural, a series of midnight calls, strange apparitions, and inexplicable encounters that defied modern explanation. Yet, no tale resonated as deeply as that fateful stormy night at the coastal cottage. For Keisha, the experience was a turning point, a reminder that even in a world of reason and progress, there remained realms of mystery, where the past lingered like a ghost, demanding remembrance and redemption. And so, the legend of Eliza Marrow grew, whispered on stormy nights and recounted by those brave enough to listen. The coastal cottage, once a relic of sorrow and abandonment, became a symbol of the island's unyielding connection to its history, a monument to lost souls who, in their silent yearning, still sought to be heard. For Keisha, every midnight call that followed was a reminder of that night, the sound of despair in a trembling voice, the chill of a ghost's touch, and the unspoken promise that some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. And as the island slumbered under the watchful eye of the moon, her voice on the radio carried a truth, that even the most tormented souls might find solace in being remembered, and that in the realm of the supernatural, the living and the dead are forever intertwined. Thus, the midnight call became more than a moment of terror. It was a bridge between two worlds, a call to honor the memories of those left behind. And in every soft whisper that broke through the static, there was a hope that maybe, just maybe, the broken could be healed, if only someone would listen. May this tale serve as a chilling reminder that beneath every call in the dead of night, there might lie a story of sorrow and longing, a story of a soul reaching out from the shadows, desperate to be heard, and yearning for the redemption that only remembrance can bring.
The night had fallen like a heavy shroud over the Jamaican countryside. In the remote stretches of St. Elizabeth, where the remnants of old sugar plantations whispered stories of a troubled past, a lonely road wound its way through dense foliage and forgotten ruins. This was a place where the modern world met the ancient, and where every rustle of wind or flicker of shadow carried the weight of untold secrets. Samuel, a young traveler returning home from the bustling city, had chosen this desolate road for its isolation. He had always preferred solitude, a brief respite from the relentless pace of urban life. But that night, as the heavy mist rolled in from the sea and swallowed the moonlight, the road seemed transformed into an endless corridor of darkness. Each step he took felt like an intrusion into a realm not meant for the living. At first, the silence was disconcerting but almost soothing. The soft hum of nocturnal insects provided a gentle counterpoint to his measured footsteps on the gravel path. Yet, as he ventured further into the night, an eerie sense of foreboding began to settle over him. The air was unnaturally still, and the comforting chirrups of crickets had given way to a low, almost imperceptible murmur, a whisper that echoed like a forgotten lament. As Samuel pressed onward, he noticed that the familiar landscape of rusted plantation fences and weathered stone cottages had given way to dense patches of wild vegetation and ancient trees whose gnarled branches clawed at the dark sky. The road itself seemed to twist and curve in impossible ways, as if guided by an unseen hand. Every so often, he would catch a glimpse of a dilapidated building or a crumbling homestead, relics of a time when the plantation was alive with activity and sorrow. A chill that had little to do with the cool night air crawled up Samuel's spine. His pulse quickened, and he found himself scanning the periphery of his vision, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the mists. The legends of the Duppies, restless spirits doomed to wander these lands, flashed through his mind like a half-forgotten nightmare. He had heard whispers among the older folks in town, tales of a phantom who haunted the very road he now trod. They said it was a soul tormented by tragedy, doomed to an eternity of aimless wandering. It was then that Samuel's eyes caught a flicker of movement. Out of the corner of his vision, a pale silhouette glided along the roadside. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, a stray animal perhaps. But as he slowed his pace, the figure became clearer. Clad in tattered remnants of clothing that seemed to belong to another era, the apparition moved with an uncanny fluidity, as if it were not bound by the normal constraints of human motion. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes in the ghostly visage, glowed with a faint, spectral light that pierced through the oppressive darkness. For a long, suspended moment, Samuel stood frozen. The figure did not approach immediately. Instead, it drifted along the side of the road, as if it were aware of him but content to remain at a distance. Yet, the sense of being observed was overwhelming. The whispering wind now carried words, indecipherable murmurs that made his skin crawl. The voice was not one of comfort but of ancient sorrow and despair. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest as he recalled the old stories of the plantation. It was said that during the era of slavery, a young man of extraordinary beauty had fallen in love with a free woman, a forbidden union that doomed them both. Their love, doomed from the start, ended in a blood-soaked tragedy. The young man had been executed for his defiance, and his spirit, tormented by the cruelty of his fate, was condemned to roam the plantation grounds, seeking redemption or revenge. No one was quite sure which. Over time, the tale had morphed into legend, and the phantom on this road had become an icon of spectral sorrow. Compelled by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, Samuel took a hesitant step forward. The apparition seemed to sense his movement, pausing as though to study him. In the dim glow of a distant street lamp, the figure's face was partially illuminated, a visage marked by anguish and an inexpressible grief that transcended mortal suffering. The spectral eyes, though unblinking, seemed to weep a silent sorrow. Samuel's breath caught as the figure began to move slowly in his direction. Every instinct in his body urged him to run, yet his feet felt rooted to the spot. The path before him grew distorted, the boundary between reality and nightmare dissolving with each agonizing second. The phantom's presence seemed to warp the very air around it, as if the weight of its tormented existence had seeped into the fabric of the night. The once familiar plantation road now looked alien and hostile, a passage into a realm where past and present collided. Samuel's mind raced. He remembered the legends of protection and the power of ancient prayers. In a desperate bid for escape, he fumbled in his pocket for the small talisman his grandmother had given him, a silver pendant etched with symbols of protection. It had been passed down through generations, a family heirloom said to ward off malevolent spirits. Clutching it tightly, he repeated a prayer in a trembling voice, the words of exorcism barely audible over the pounding of his heart. The phantom halted, its spectral form wavering as though caught in an invisible current. The mist thickened, swirling around Samuel in ghostly tendrils. For what felt like an eternity, there was a palpable silence, broken only by the low hum of the wind and Samuel's ragged breaths. Then, as if struck by an unseen force, the apparition surged forward. The spectral figure moved with a speed that belied its ethereal appearance, its form contorting and stretching unnaturally as it closed the distance between them. In that heart-stopping moment, Samuel's terror transformed into a desperate resolve. He backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with the phantom. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, yet he felt compelled to confront this lingering echo of the past. With shaking hands, he extended the silver pendant as if offering it to the spirit. A plea for mercy, for release from its eternal torment. The ghost paused, and in the shifting light of the mist, Samuel thought he saw the faintest glimmer of recognition in its spectral eyes. It was as if the apparition had felt the warmth of the pendant and remembered a time when life and love still existed. For a brief, agonizing second, the figure seemed to waver between two states, one of haunting sorrow and another of gentle resignation. Then, as if driven by a force beyond comprehension, the phantom recoiled. Its form began to blur and distort, the edges of its being dissolving into the darkness from which it had emerged. The oppressive atmosphere lifted ever so slightly, leaving Samuel trembling on the roadside, heart pounding in his ears. The silence that followed was deafening. A void filled with both relief and the lingering echo of a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. Samuel did not stop to ponder what he had witnessed. He turned and ran, stumbling along the plantation road as the mists began to recede with the first hints of dawn. Yet even as the light of morning broke through the darkness, the memory of that spectral encounter remained indelibly etched in his mind. Every shadow, every gust of wind, seemed now to carry the faint whisper of a lost soul. In the days that followed, Samuel sought answers. He returned to the small village near the plantation, where the elders welcomed his inquiries with solemn nods and whispered warnings. They told him of the young man, a victim of an unjust fate whose spirit had been condemned to eternal wandering. The story was as old as the land itself, passed down through generations and shrouded in mystery. Some said that the phantom was doomed never to find peace, that its anguished cries for lost love and stolen dreams echoed in the night like a dirge. Others believed that the spirit was a harbinger of doom, a warning of the consequences of defying the natural order. Night after night, the villagers recounted similar tales of inexplicable phenomena along the plantation road. Strange lights that flickered in the distance, disembodied voices carried on the wind, and fleeting glimpses of a figure cloaked in sorrow. Yet none had ever dared to confront the phantom so directly as Samuel had. His encounter became a cautionary tale, a modern chapter in an ancient legend. While some dismissed his experience as a trick of the mind, others felt a deep, unspoken fear whenever the mist rolled in and the night seemed too quiet. Haunted by his ordeal, Samuel found that sleep no longer came easily. In the quiet hours before dawn, he would awaken to the sound of soft, spectral footsteps outside his window. Shadows danced on the walls of his room, and the once familiar creaks of his home took on the timbre of an otherworldly lament. Friends and family, once reassured by his pragmatic nature, now watched him with wary eyes, as though he had become a living relic of the old legends. One particularly stormy night, when the heavens wept bitter tears and the wind howled like a chorus of anguished souls, Samuel decided he must confront the terror that had taken root in his mind. Armed with nothing more than the silver pendant and a determined heart, he retraced his steps along the plantation road. The journey was both a quest for understanding and a desperate bid to reclaim the tranquility that had been stolen from him. As he made his way along the winding path, the familiar oppressive mist began to gather once more. The road, illuminated by intermittent flashes of lightning, stretched before him like a dark ribbon through the cursed land. Every step felt heavy with anticipation, each rustle in the underbrush a reminder that he was not alone. Samuel's breath came in ragged gasps as he clutched the pendant close, reciting the protective incantations taught to him by his grandmother. Then, from the depths of the darkness, the phantom appeared again. This time, the spectral figure emerged with an urgency that sent shivers down Samuel's spine. The ghost moved with purpose, its eyes ablaze with that same sorrowful light. Samuel's resolve faltered for a moment, but then he steadied himself, determined to understand the nature of this eternal wanderer. He addressed the spirit, his voice trembling yet resolute. "I know your pain. I feel your sorrow. Tell me, What binds you to this endless night? The words hung in the air, a challenge thrown to the void of despair. For an agonizing moment, there was only silence. Then the phantom's form wavered, and in the fleeting clarity of the lightning's glare, Samuel saw a visage contorted by anguish, a face that had once known love and hope, now marred by grief. In that spectral gaze, Samuel discerned a silent plea, a longing to be freed from the shackles of a tragic past. As if compelled by forces beyond his control, he lowered his pendant and stepped closer. "I wish to help," he whispered, voice thick with empathy and fear. "I want you to find peace." The apparition hesitated, its form flickering as if caught between the realms of life and death. The air around them crackled with a tension that was almost tangible, and the storm's fury seemed to fade into a distant murmur. Then, with a final, sorrowful look, the phantom began to dissolve. Its features softened, and for a moment, the specter appeared as a mere shadow of a man. A young lover, a victim of time and cruelty, surrendering to the inevitable passage of both night and pain. The moment passed as swiftly as it had arrived. The phantom faded into the mist, leaving Samuel alone on the deserted road. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Though the encounter had ended, the memory of that haunted night would forever linger in Samuel's soul, a reminder that some spirits are bound by regrets, and that the darkness holds truths too profound for words. Returning to the village, Samuel became a quiet guardian of that old legend. His encounter was recounted with hushed voices by those who believed, and with skeptical caution by those who doubted. Yet even as life moved on, the plantation road remained a place where the boundaries between past and present blurred. On stormy nights, when the mists gathered and the wind carried echoes of lost love, villagers claimed they could see a solitary figure wandering the road, a gentle reminder of a soul searching for redemption. Samuel eventually came to accept that the phantom's sorrow was not a curse upon the land but a legacy of human tragedy. In his quiet moments, he would often return to that lonely road, not out of fear, but out of a deep sense of compassion for the soul who had once dared to love in a world that had no place for such tenderness. The silver pendant, worn and tarnished with time, remained close to his heart, a symbol of his encounter and the fragile hope that even the darkest spirits might one day find peace. And so, the legend of the phantom on the plantation road grew, woven into the fabric of the island's folklore. It became a story told around flickering candlelight and whispered in the hush of the night, a tale of love, loss, and the eternal quest for redemption. Samuel's experience, forever etched in his memory, served as a beacon for those who believed that sometimes the line between the living and the dead is not as rigid as it seems. In the years that followed, whenever the mist rolled in thick and the plantation road seemed to stretch into endless night, the locals would glance nervously toward the darkness. They would speak of a phantom, a gentle, sorrowful spirit doomed to wander, forever seeking solace in the silence of the night. And though the modern world marched on, the timeless echo of that tragic encounter continued to remind all who heard it that some stories, and some souls, remain forever suspended between the realms of hope and despair. Thus ends the tale of the phantom on the plantation road, a chilling reminder of the human heart's capacity for both love and loss, and of the restless spirits that continue to wander our world, driven by memories too profound to fade away. For those who dare to walk the lonely paths at night, the past is never truly dead. It lives on in every whisper of the wind, in every flicker of ghostly light, and in every tear that the darkness dares to shed. May this story serve as a warning and a tribute, a testament to the enduring power of tragedy, the persistence of lost souls, and the haunting beauty of legends that refuse to be forgotten. These tales remind us, the Duppies are not mere legends, but echoes of lives and losses that linger in the quiet corners of our island. Whether beneath a mango tree, along a foggy road, or in the silence of a midnight call, their presence endures. So, when you hear a rustle in the dark or a whisper on the wind, remember these stories, and know that the spirit world, with all its mystery and melancholy, is never far away. If you're enjoying this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more.